is Mallory, and I am an AmeriCorps member serving for Conservation Nebraska Common Ground program. Conservation Nebraska's mission is to protect our state's natural legacy by educating the public, supporting communities, and increasing civic engagement, which we accomplish through locally led education efforts and community engagement projects to address local conservation concerns. Before tonight's speakers, there are a few housekeeping things to go over. Your cameras will remain off and you will be muted throughout the presentation. Please type any questions you have in the chat or the Q&A section, and we will answer those after the presentation. This presentation is recorded and it will be uploaded to Conservation Nebraska's YouTube page within a couple weeks. So if you miss anything, would like to revisit a part, or share any of this with anyone else, you'll be able to find it there. After the presentation, it'll be a brief survey that'll take less than a minute to complete, just a few questions that'll help keep supporting programs like this one, and we all appreciate it if you would take some time to fill it out afterwards. If anyone is interested in speaking with a Conservation Nebraska member regarding any conservation issues or to find out more about what we do, I will put our email into the chat. And tonight we will welcome Justin Evertson from Plant Nebraska, who is going to speak about green infrastructure to increase landscape sustainability and storm solutions in Nebraska. Justin has worked for Nebraska Forest Service and Nebraska Statewide Arboretum since 1990, serving as a green infrastructure coordinator since 2010. He oversees programs that provide funding, technical assistance, and educational outreach for community, forestry, and public landscaping efforts across the state. Justin is also involved in several tree and shrub trialing efforts to help expand the awareness and availability of underutilized species for the state. His areas of expertise are in trees, arboriculture, and sustainable landscaping. Justin has also authored several publications for Plant Nebraska with an emphasis on woody plant selection. Justin grew up on a farm in western Kimball County where he learned an appreciation for short grass prairie and Nebraska's wide open spaces. He's passionate about trees, the native landscape, biodiversity, and sustainability. Justin lives in Waverly, where he serves as a volunteer community forester, planting trees across the community and working to make the community more biodiverse and sustainable. I will now let him take away with his presentation.
All right. Excuse me. All right. Thank you, Mallory. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right. That's awesome. I'm going to have to share a screen here, everybody. Yep, I'm Justin Evertson with Plant Nebraska and the Nebraska Forest Service. I work out of the University East Campus here in Lincoln, and I live in Waverly. So I'm mostly an Eastern Nebraska person now, but I grew up in Western Nebraska, and my work takes me across the state. So I feel like Nebraska is definitely home. I get to see and interact with people and landscapes all across the state. I love it, and I love trying to convey things I've learned and to help other people figure out what trees and other things will grow here and how we can make our landscapes more sustainable. As Mallory said, I coordinate the Champion Tree program for Nebraska. We were out this morning actually measuring several trees in eastern Nebraska, one out near, not far from the Missouri River, kind of south of Plattsmouth, east of Union. There was a great big old bur oak we measured, and then we measured a cottonwood near Unadilla that was over 100 feet tall. So that was pretty impressive to see. It's not going to be our champion, but it's still an impressive tree. Let me share my program. Oops, that didn't work. I did the wrong thing. Let's find the right thing to share. I should have been ready, shouldn't I have? Where's that? There it is. Okay, green infrastructure. We're going to talk about green infrastructure tonight. Mallory, I hope you're going to watch the chat. I won't probably be able to pay too good of attention to that, but let's see what we've got. Is it still, Desiree says there's an echo. Are you still hearing an echo?
I don't. Do you still,
Okay.
Desiree?
Echo, 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 echo. That's terrible of me, right? Well, I'm going to proceed unless people think it's a bad connection. Let me know in the chat, but we're going to talk green
Yeah.
infrastructure tonight.
Thank you. Maybe.
Let's have fun with this too, guys. If we're not having fun talking about trees and landscapes, we're not doing it right. So, um, what is green infrastructure? I hate to throw out these text slides first things, and I probably won't read everything on here, but just to make you upfront and aware what we're talking about with green infrastructure, it is the collective green and blue spaces of a community utilized to meet several beneficial outcomes, including those related to stormwater management. We're going to talk about things that way that are involved in stormwater management. Tree canopy, the canopy of our communities, we call those the community forest. That's really vital green infrastructure. And then the functional green spaces that act as access points for nature and recreation and improved health outcomes for people in every community. Our green spaces are vital for all of this. So that green infrastructure in any community, any size urban space is really critical to the livability of the places we want to be at, right? When you stop and think about it. It's often referred to, green infrastructure is often referred to as blue-green infrastructure because it goes hand in hand with stormwater management. In fact, most of the literature now and research around green infrastructure is really tied into stormwater capture, stormwater management, and water conservation. So that's where the blue angle comes into this. This is in a corollary to what we call gray infrastructure in a community. That is the hard things that move water away, like gutters and pipes and tunnels. And then there's also this other thing we call the hard infrastructure of a community, which is the buildings, the roads, the sidewalks, the utilities, all the stuff we build. That's the hard infrastructure. And green infrastructure is the stuff that's living and breathing and helping us to manage our communities better. The Nebraska Forest Service and Plant Nebraska. So I get to wear a hat in both organizations. I'm technically employed by the Nebraska Forest Service, and the Plant Nebraska organization is a nonprofit affiliate housed within the Nebraska Forest Service administratively. So I work across both groups, and we have kind of these 5 or 6 big program goals related to green infrastructure, what we're trying to do. So first and foremost is improving our tree canopy and the community forests, all the trees and the goodness they do for our communities. Another thing we focus on is biodiversity. Just improve the biodiversity of our own yards, landscapes, neighborhoods, and communities. Then we have, like we definitely want to emphasize tonight, stormwater management. How can we help capture, slow, and treat stormwater runoff to reduce problems in storm events and pollution? Water conservation is a big one, of course, especially here in the Great Plains where it could be horribly, horribly droughty. And it's that way out in western Nebraska right now. My home farm out in Kimball County is way below 50% normal moisture. It's a very horrible drought year. And out here in eastern Nebraska, it's plenty wet here lately. So we have to think about it broadly in terms of water conservation. We really are strongly emphasizing this whole notion of rethinking the lawn. We Americans love our lawn. We want to mow everything around the places we live in our communities. And mowing is, of course, a critical management tool for how we manage our community green spaces. But we don't have to mow everything within an inch of its life, and we don't have to make our lawns such horribly kind of landscape components, horribly addicted to water and chemical inputs to keep them alive. So we need to rethink that. And then there's invasive plants that are really problematic in a lot of ways for the things we're trying to deal with in our communities to have proper biodiversity. in some ways, the invasive plants are becoming some of the biggest issues we have to deal with. At the Nebraska Forest Service and Plant Nebraska, we both collaborate in ways of offering program assistance to Nebraskans and communities across the state in different areas. So we have urban and community forestry grants that provide funds and technical assistance for tree canopy improvements. You can actually get a free trees brought to your community for planting. This ties into Trees for Nebraska Towns and our 10 Free Trees program. That utilizes grant funds from the Nebraska Environmental Trust to help communities plant trees. There's something we call Greener Nebraska Towns, also funded by the Nebraska Environmental Trust. And that's money for landscape enhancements focused on native plants and biodiversity. We help communities sometimes with what we call small plant grants and bloom boxes, where we will load up a box of plants or a pickup of plants and we'll bring them to a project who wants to improve a public landscape area with native plants. We have an affiliated Arboretum network of sites across the state. These affiliate sites are helping to test and trial trees and plants for educational use and for people to figure out what'll grow in their own yard. We grow plants. We grow and sell plants through the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum or Plant Nebraska greenhouse. We grow thousands and thousands of plants a year and make them available for purchase, and that helps fund our organization. And then we do all kinds of education and outreach, including webinars like we're doing tonight. So I encourage you, when we get to the end here, I'll give you links to learning more about Plant Nebraska and the Nebraska Forest Service. I'm going to look at chat here again. Okay, I don't see anything to worry about right now. Okay, our community landscapes are often resource intensive, water inefficient, and not reflective of our place on the Great Plains. I throw these pictures in here to show you that we love our lawns and to keep them kind of shortly cropped. And then we often lose sight of what are some of the other things we could be growing in our landscapes. So how can we strike a better balance in developing our community landscapes to maximize shade, wildlife habitat, carbon capture, energy conservation, water conservation, stormwater retention, walkability, safety, and a sense of place beauty? Well, this presentation will help explore some of the ways to do that. Across Nebraska and really across the globe, right in your own backyard, everywhere we live, there are many environmental challenges, especially in our communities. This stretches across all kinds of big, globally impactful things like habitat loss, decreased biodiversity, and increasing extinction rates. Climate change, degraded and eroded soils, water quantity and quality concerns, invasive species, there it is again, herbicide damage, which is something I deal with almost daily in my work, and human apathy and our disconnect from nature. There's just no two ways around it. I don't mean to make anybody feel bad. I have a smartphone. I like to get on the computer and be electronically connected to the world. That is the world now. But it does mean that we have become disconnected from the natural world. When we were kids, we were out climbing trees, getting dirty, chasing frogs and butterflies. And now in our adult years, we often don't get our feet wet or our hands dirty anymore, mostly because we're an affluent society and we don't have to deal with that. But I think that does make an impact in the way we do our home and community landscapes because of our disconnect. We don't realize the importance of biodiversity and things like that. So here's just some quick statistics on what happens when we do so much emphasis on maintaining lawns around the places we live. There's 40.5 million acres nationally of lawn in this country. That would be the biggest crop in all the country if we measured it as a crop, way more than corn ground even. It costs over $30 billion a year. And then probably the worst thing it does for us in the Midwest and the Great Plains is it uses a lot of water. And in Nebraska, that could be 300 million gallons a day dumped onto our lawns just to try and keep them green. In Lincoln here where I live, today was a hot day and we probably threw out 30 to 40 million gallons of water, drinking water, treated drinking water to try and keep our lawns green. So it's not that lawns are bad. Lawns are really actually quite important to our public landscapes. We need them in our communities where we live, work, and play for sure. But we just got to be careful that we don't overdo it and harm the rest of the landscape in our lawn efforts. So our planted landscapes can definitely do more to help conserve resources and sustain biodiversity. I think the trick is to try and embrace a bit more naturalness in our landscapes, work with Mother Nature, and just be accepting a little bit of what she wants to get done. I like this quote by E.O. Wilson: "The biological diversity is the key to the maintenance of the world as we know it." So, 5 big suggestions for better landscape resiliency, and we'll go through these in our sections of slides, but plant more trees, especially large canopy trees where they make the most sense, where you need shade and along streets in a community. Those large canopy trees are going to do the best work for cooling our places and capturing stormwater. We need to rethink the lawn. We need to use the landscape to help capture, slow, and filter stormwater. And we need to choose plants wisely. We need to strive for greater biodiversity across all the landscape work we do, but especially emphasize native plants, and along those same lines, exclude invasive plants that we know are problematic. And then finally, we don't think about this enough, but we really need to work at improving and sustaining soil health and practicing nutrient recycling. And actually, improving our soils is quite easy to do over time if we're careful about it and just practice nutrient recycling. So let's dive right in here to the first topic, and that's trees. If we climb up on the state capitol and look out across Lincoln, you can see there is a forest of trees. That is the community forest. That did not used to be there 150 years ago when Nebraska was getting settled. But I don't know of anybody who wants to live in a Nebraska community today without trees. It is hot, it is windy, it is dry, it is cold, it can be wet, and those trees help buffer the landscapes of the places we live. So we need to keep planting trees. Just think about the value of one well-placed tree, such as this big bur oak near this house-like building in Milford at the community college campus. It's going to provide cool summer shade for that whole corner of the house. It'll provide at least 10% energy savings in the summer just with the shade on that roof. So that's at least $350, maybe $500 a year on a bigger sized building. You're going to capture or slow 12,000 gallons of stormwater a year minimum. You're going to capture and sequester at least 575 pounds of CO2. And with a big tree like that, it's actually probably closer to 3,000 or 4,000 pounds of CO2. That tree is a buzzing smorgasbord or home place for all kinds of wildlife, including birds and insects and flying squirrels and other things. I think that would be a great tree for a kid to be able to climb. And then that tree, when you think about a big tree at your house, when you're coming home at the end of the day, you're probably subconsciously as welcomed by that tree as you are by anything else. So a beauty and a lifetime of pleasure. This quote about time spent amongst trees is never wasted time. I love that quote. These are my grandkids. We like to go out amongst the trees all the time. Unfortunately, all is not well for our trees. We're losing them fairly rapidly in some of our older neighborhoods of our communities, and that is related to things like climate and weather, insects and diseases, invasive species, just an aging and shrinking community forest canopy. There's lack of species diversity. Lawn care issues are really hard on trees. Herbicide damage from farming in our part of the world is one of the biggest problems. Nursery quality and availability of trees is a big challenge. And then there's just challenges to being in the urban environment, including human neglect and apathy. People aren't always trying to kill trees, but they'll drive over their roots or they'll run them into them with their lawnmower, and that'll cause trees to decline. Here's a good example of something to think about just in East Lincoln: species diversity lessons not learned. Emerald ash borer is here, and it is killing thousands and thousands of trees across Lincoln and Omaha every year. And it's estimated to kind of kill over 4 million ash trees across Nebraska over the coming years. So it's going to be an big impact on one of our most important native trees. And here in East Lincoln, this is I forget the name of that neighborhood. Do I have it on no, we don't need to worry about it. But East Lincoln, look at all those ash trees that went away just because they didn't plant a better diversity of trees along that street. So we're slowly losing our big trees in our communities. It's estimated 30 to 50% canopy loss since 1970, depending on the neighborhood you're in. And in Lincoln, now it's up to about 20,000 public trees have been removed just over the last 6 or 7 years. So, of course, keep planting trees. We don't need a tree in every spot where a tree could grow, but let's put them in the places where they make the most sense for their shade. I mentioned this earlier. Let's rethink the lawn. I love my own lawn at home. I have a little bit of lawn, so we don't want to say that all lawn is bad. But when we fuss over the lawn and pour way too many chemicals, fertilizers, and water on it, we are not doing things in a resilient or sustainable method, in my opinion. So a lawn can be many things. Let's start by thinking it that way first. You could plant meadows or prairie meadows in the right setting within our part of the world. That's a bold solution. That's not for everybody, for sure. But just think about the people that own these properties. They planted a lot of taller prairie type plants, and they're going to be very resilient to the landscape or to the climate that comes along. A meadow lawn on the left again, and then on the right, this is a shorter meadow made of an eco-grass lawn mix. This seed mix came from Prairie Moon Nursery, and it has different types of fescues in it. And then you let that grow. You don't mow it, but except maybe 4 or 5 times a year, and you mow it as high as you possibly can. Here out in Alliance is a shortgrass prairie border planted primarily to blue grama and probably also side oats grama. Here on the University East campus and other places around the state, there are buffalo grass lawns, which are very, very heat and drought tolerant. We just need to be aware that they're not a perfect solution in and of themselves because there's a lot of weed pressure on buffalo grass. And now something that is taking off pretty quickly across the country, including in Nebraska, and that's the idea of planting sedges and to create a sedge lawn, possibly mixing it with some of those tall fescues we looked at a minute ago. Those would blend nicely to create a kind of a meadow of a lawn, even under trees. There are all kinds of sedge species that we can use. Some are more refined and smaller bladed, and others are taller and a little more coarsely toothed, but they all make good choices in the right situation. Those are sedges. Sedges are related to grasses. They're not true grasses, but if you examine a prairie in Nebraska or a woodland, you would be surprised to learn that sedges are some of the more abundant and important plants in those environments. And then finally, the simplest solution is to just relax and be more accepting of Mother Nature's handiwork. So let's have fewer inputs, less mowing, less watering, less fertilizer, less pesticides. It doesn't mean you have to do none of that, but just less of it. And then accept the existence of other mowable plants, including benign weeds. This is a picture of the Wayne Park in Waverly, where I live, and I help manage the park, and I work hard at trying to make sure we don't mow too short or that we're not spraying chemicals we don't need to spray. And it can be done. We can be accepting of plants that are not grasses that will grow just fine here. If they're not invasive or problematic, you can plant all kinds of things that you would end up mowing, and then you'd have a much more biodiverse lawn that would be attractive to more pollinators and animals and better for the soil and all of that. So there's a list of plants there that you could plant like clover, yarrow, thyme, petunia. And then there's things that you can just let exist. You probably wouldn't plant these things actually, but they will come to the lawn, and just don't spray them out. So like wild violets and plantain and wood sorrel, purslane and henbit, even prostate spurge and maybe even ground ivy. If you're not fighting those things real bad, your inputs are lower and you're causing less problems across the landscape in terms of overuse of chemicals. So one of the big things I try to convey to people is, it's our human nature to make things neat and tidy, to put things in order, and that's very much okay. We don't want a weedy mess in our landscapes or our yards. We don't want to look like our landscapes are abandoned to our neighbors that would complain about it. So we have to be careful with this. But it is okay to rethink weeds in the landscape. And some of these benign weeds or beneficial weeds, like honeyvine milkweed, nettles, and then violets, we can just let a lot of that go in the landscape and not work too hard at getting rid of them. Okay, if we're doing our community landscapes right and our home landscapes, part of our green infrastructure efforts are helping to capture and slow stormwater runoff. And we typically use these kinds of tools to do that. Rain gardens, bioswales, porous pavement, and green roofs. And we're going to touch on several of these. I am not a porous pavement expert or a green roof pavement, but I'll show you a few images of some of those projects that are doing good in that regard. Let's first start by just a quick definition of some of these terms. Rain gardens, bioswales, and bioretention are usually the things we're talking about using plants to help us in capturing and slowing stormwater. A rain garden, all of these things are green infrastructure methods designed to manage, filter, and reduce stormwater runoff using vegetation, and then also engineered soils. They don't have to be engineered by an engineer, but when you're doing these things right, you're probably you're taking away horrible clay and you're bringing back in soil that is more porous and able to infiltrate the soil. The primary differences in these terms is their function and shape. So a rain garden are typically small, shallow basins with vegetation, let's just say wet tolerant vegetation that allows stormwater to slowly absorb. These are things that are on a homeowner scale, the rain garden, and that's an example here, a picture on the lower right. Bioswales are linear channels that convey water from one point to another. They are not a depression, so the water is flowing through a bioswale, but the plants are helping to slow it down and capture and filter that stormwater as it flows through. And then on the left, this is going to be a bioretention basin. And bioretention areas are generally larger than a rain garden. They are sunken and basin-like, and they are designed to capture and hold stormwater in place until it infiltrates or evaporates. Just be aware that there are also things out there that help with stormwater capture in big developments. These are called retention ponds, and oftentimes those hold water permanently. They're probably designed to hold water permanently, but the water in a dry stretch is probably evaporating and getting quite shallow, but usually they're wet in some form or another, and they're usually associated with big developments. That's not what we're talking about here tonight in terms of the kind of green infrastructure that we normally think of doing on the neighborhood scale. So why do we do rain gardens and bioswales? Well, rain gardens and bioswales catch and hold water giving the water time to absorb into the ground so it's not running off the landscape, ending up in our ditches and running into our stormwater treatments systems or our local bodies of water. It treats water like a resource to make it available for landscape plants. And then the water is filtered out, and the plants are filtering out sediments, fertilizers, oil, trash, and other pollutants that run off and that we all often call non-point source pollutants. And so we want to capture and hold that in our landscapes as much as we can, not flush it down into our rivers, lakes, ponds, and streams. That is not good, right? That just makes a lot of sense. So here's a couple examples of bioretention places or rain gardens. This we call the Fireworks Rain Garden in Southeast Lincoln at the Fireworks Restaurant. We helped plant this actually 15 to 20 years ago now, but this is both bioretention and a rain garden because water is, excuse me, a bioswale. Water is flowing through this property, and then it's actually getting caught in a couple small retention areas and then filtering off into the adjacent Antelope Creek headwater. So this is what it looked like shortly after planting. If I took you there today, the trees and the shrubs are ginormous. The plants on the right side of this lower picture, the trees and shrubs, the trees are all now 20 to 30 feet tall. Buttonbush shrubs are up to 15 feet tall. And so a lot of these more prairie-like plants, herbaceous plants, are getting shaded out a little bit now, but it's still a very high-functioning bioretention swell. Here's a project we did on East Campus many years ago. This was the Plant Nebraska bioswale, where water flowing off of a parking lot ran through a depression before it emptied into the Dead Man's Run in the back of the photograph. And we planted that low swale to wet-tolerant plants, sedges, and all kinds of things. That's Bob Henriksen planting it many years ago. There is now a greenhouse constructed over this spot, so we have lost it as a garden, but it is still functioning as a bioretention component to these campus landscape. Here's what it looked like a few years ago in a couple rain events. Water coming in, getting pooled for a few hours at a time, and then running through those sedges, evaporating, and then being dry within a day or two later. Here are a few other examples. Locally, this is East Campus student parking area where the water is purposely directed towards these interior swale zones where the water flows in and then fills up these basins, and the wet tolerant plants help filter it out over time. You can see on this picture on the left that box at the front or at the bottom of that curb cutout. That is called a retention box, and it's a place where you would actually, it helps filter out sand and rocks and trash and things like that, so you can come in and clean that out. A 4-bay, over time, you can just scoop out the sand and the debris over time. Here's a couple examples from downtown Lincoln. This one is on N Street, where you can see the water is directed into these curb cuts, and they flow into these green planted bioretention swales. Another one on P Street in Lincoln, downtown. Water flows in, fills up the cell for a little while. There's often an overflow pipe so that the water can't flow onto the sidewalk or into the local businesses or anything like that. There's usually an overflow pipe in these things that helps in big events the water move into the stormwater sewer system. In downtown Lincoln, if you're ever downtown, take a look. They have planted all these bioswales and rain gardens to a wonderful mix of mostly native or regionally native plants that thrive in these bioswales or wet zones. Here's another example. This is a rain garden at the Columbus Chamber of Commerce on the left, and then on the upper right, if you're ever out at the Nebraska State Fairgrounds in Grand Island, they have a nice bioretention or bioswale zone right there too. Whoops, where am I at? Okay, moving out west. So we're out in Scotts Bluff, out in western Nebraska. Downtown Scotts Bluff has done a lot of work in creating these bioretention swales along parking lots and then utilizing both wet tolerant and drought tolerant plants to exist in these zones. On the left is the Scotts Bluff Library with a bioswale, and on the right is the Educational Service Unit out in Scotts Bluff, utilizing a bioswale to capture and slow water that is channeled off of that roof. You can see the gutter in the background, which is linked right to the top edge of this bioswale. That's where the stormwater is running through. Okay, moving on to something a little bit with more in the hardscape, and that's the permeable pavement. A lot of places, especially bigger cities now, are turning this old parking lot paradigm on its head. So this is a picture from Western Nebraska at the Scottsbluff Community College. And forever we would plant these medians to a grass and maybe a few trees, but they would be a convex median. That means they were built up and to shed water to the storm conveyance system. These things become hard to manage. They're hard to mow. They're not very usable for stormwater capture or biodiversity. So what if we just turned that on its head? And instead of making them convex, we made them concave, and the water would flow into these things that are lower than the surrounding pavement, and they'd filter through plants and also porous pavement, and we'd get our stormwater uh, filtered right here on site in a much bigger scale. So these are a couple of pictures from the Morton Arboretum out in Lisle, Illinois, outside of Chicago. And they've done both things. They've done bioretention swales and they've also done permeable pavement. Permeable pavement can include bricks that have gaps between them so the water flows through the gaps between the paving bricks, or it can be porous concrete, which is concrete actually engineered so that the water flows through it and doesn't just flow off over the top. That kind of concrete is pretty expensive, so it doesn't get done a lot, but these are all things that are coming on gangbusters in our bigger cities in terms of stormwater capture. And then I'll just show you a couple examples of green roofs. A green roof is planted vegetation grown on top of a building's conventional roof surface, usually a flat roof. It typically consists of engineered soil, plants, and drainage layers. And then these green roofs help manage stormwater by capturing and slowing it. They reduce the urban heat island effect, and then they lower building energy costs. In Lincoln and Omaha, there are several green roofs now. This is an example of one at the Assurity building on the east side of downtown Lincoln. We were just there a few weeks ago. In the picture on the lower left, you'll see that curved wall at the base of the building, and on top of that, 2 levels of building, there's a green roof there. And here's a picture of a person managing that just a few weeks ago, getting out weedy plants and making sure the drainage system is working properly. And then here's an example out in Denver. I was able to be out to the CSU Spur campus north of downtown Denver. And this is a really fun place to see a green roof and all kinds of cool sustainability and resilient activities going on in this whole building complex with a lot of permeable pavers and all kinds of stuff happening. And then a lot of native plants planted into those green roofs. Okay, another thing we need to be trying to do is just strive for landscape biodiversity by emphasizing native plants. And here's just the many benefits of landscape biodiversity: greater diversity of wildlife, including insects, birds, amphibians, and reptiles. We want all those things in our communities and in our yards. We do get tired of squirrels and raccoons and possums. I agree with you there. But actually, those things are part of that system. If we can tolerate a little bit of that, our biodiversity is making our communities better. More pollinators and better pollination. more predatory insects that are eating the bad insects. So we have better food webs and fewer pest outbreaks. We have better soil. We have stormwater absorption, greater resiliency to weather events, insects, and disease, and then beauty. Our native plants are just absolutely beautiful in the right context. So Nebraska's native landscape is a mix of biomes. We are at a crossroads of biomes where east meets west. So we've got eastern deciduous forest, western Rocky Mountain forest. On the eastern end of the state is that eastern deciduous forest that reaches us from the eastern US. And on the western end of the state, it's pine lands, mostly from the Rocky Mountain influence. We don't have a lot of woodland, but the woodland we do is vitally important to our landscapes or to the things we're trying to figure out what to grow. But we do have a lot of prairie. Nebraska was 95% prairie at the time of settlement, with all kinds of prairie, not just the tall grass prairie, but mixed grass prairie and short grass prairie as well. So we are prairie country, but we do have 40 tree and shrub species that reach their geographic range limits here in Nebraska, and we can utilize those trees and shrubs more in our planted landscapes. Here's a few pictures of just some of our prairie diversity. On the lower picture on the left, that is outside of Unadilla, southeast of Lincoln. There's Michael Forsberg's picture of Spring Creek Prairie on the lower right. And then on the upper right is Chase County, where it's more of a short and mixed grass prairie out in southwest Nebraska. Think about this, that dynamic tall grass prairie, which enveloped the eastern third of Nebraska at the time of settlement, is less than 1% remaining across North America. It's probably the most imperiled native ecosystem in all of the world. Our native tall grass prairie. So we need to hold on to that, and we need to start replanting it where we can, including in our parks and our acreages and on our farms and places like that. As we talk about stormwater capture, something to think in mind is that the prairie was the original carbon sink and a stormwater sponge. Water did not run off of our tall grass prairies unless it was just an absolutely torrential downpour, because the water soaked in with those deeply rooted plants. Native plants bring native insects, and without insects, we'd all be dead. These are some of the insects we should celebrate when we're bringing them to our landscapes, such as black swallowtail, which likes parsley and zizia, things like that. The monarchs that love milkweed, and then the regal fritillary there on the lower right. That's a threatened and endangered butterfly in Nebraska, and it needs prairie violets to survive. Bees and flies are important pollinators, not just bees, but also flies and beetles and things like that. And then the vast majority of our insects in the landscape are either beneficial or benign to plants and people. We're hoping that some of them are not benign to the bad bugs in our landscapes. And so there's a lot of bug eat bug world going on out there. And the more biodiverse things are, the better balance of insects we have. When we have a lot of insects, we have a lot of birds. Birds, 90% of their diet is insects. Even in the winter, they are actually eating insects in our trees that are overwintering in our trees, believe it or not. So, and here's just a few more landscape examples emphasizing native plants. This is the old Ferguson House in Lincoln, catty corner from the state capitol. We helped plant it many years ago when it was home of the Nebraska Environmental Trust. We planted all kinds of beautiful and wonderful native plants around it, and they're all gone now because the new tenants in the building didn't like the look of our native plants, and they returned it to lawn. Beatty Elementary in South Lincoln is a fun place to go see what can be done at a grade school, a neighborhood grade school, when people come together and put their gardening efforts into utilizing more native plants. If you're in Lincoln, go visit Aldersgate Gardens, 84th and South Street, and you'll be amazed at what they've done to that church landscape in trying to figure out a more biodiverse and resilient landscape. They've done rain gardens, lawn alternatives, trees and shrubs, and it's just really incredible. In western Nebraska, we don't always capture stormwater quite as much just because it doesn't rain as much. But that doesn't mean we can't plant things to native prairie plants. This is the Sandoz Center at the Chadron State College, and these were plants that were found out at the Sandoz Sandhills Ranch, the Sandoz Sandhills Ranch. Up in Wayne at Wayne State College, they were real bold with the prairie planting right in the heart of their campus for many years. They lost this planting recently because of a building addition, but they restored it to another part of campus. A spot I've been able to be involved with in Waverly is Lawson Park, where we have planted little vignettes to prairie plants along the pathways and things, and we just let the prairie plants do their thing and mow them off a couple times a year. Also at the Waverly High School, a prairie landscape is part of the learning garden complex there. In summary, for more resilient landscapes, we need to strive for greater biodiversity, starting with plant diversity. We emphasize native plants and exclude non-native or invasive plants. We need to improve and sustain soil health and practice nutrient recycling. That means we leave the lawn clippings. We do rethink the lawn, we reduce negative lawn care impacts. We try to be water wise. We irrigate wisely and we capture stormwater. We plant more trees and native shrubs, the right tree in the right place, properly planted and managed. And as I wrap up here, I'll just let you know that if you would like, I do a weekly e-news blurb that we call the Shady Lane, part of the Nebraska Forest Service outreach efforts. And I love putting the highlight on our native trees and shrubs and other landscape efforts we're doing. You can sign up for that by just sending me an email to jevertson1@unl.edu, or you can sign up online at nfs.unl.edu/newsletters. Plant Nebraska, that's the other hat I wear. If you get a chance, go online to the plantnebraska.org website and you'll be amazed. This is where we dump most of our tree lists and recommendations for the types of plants to be growing and how to manage our landscapes. And you'll also be able to see events happening in and out around the area throughout the year, webinars, tours. We're doing actually tonight a Lincoln Garden Walk, and next week an Omaha Garden Walk. So there's all kinds of fun things happening. Okay, and I put in here, if we had time, I would just quickly run through pictures to whet your appetite of what some of our cool native plants look like both in nature and in gardens. And I'll quickly do that just to whet your appetite. These are things you can move into your own yards and your own landscapes, and they'll do just great for you. Some of our grasses like blue grama on the left and side oats grama on the right. They're actually easy to grow in our tough urban conditions, and they'll tolerate almost no watering in a drought year. Little blue stem is our state native grass. It's blue in the summer or has hints of blue in the summer and then bright red in the fall. Prairie dropseed smells like popcorn when you brush into it in the fall. It's a really wonderful arching fountain-like plant that has this veiled look to it as it seeds out in the late summer and fall. And they'll live a long, long time. There are all kinds of switchgrasses, little guys and big guys that you can put in the landscape. A few of our prairie wildflowers, including early spring bloomers like pasqueflower, prairie smoke, and prairie spiderwort. Late spring bloomers like pale purple coneflower and our native garden purple coneflower. The milkweeds are absolutely critically important for sustaining monarch butterflies, and they are easy to grow. And in fact, the common milkweed here on the upper right or the showy milkweed on the lower right from western Nebraska will come to your landscapes uninvited. You don't need to plant them. You just need to let them live where they want to live in your landscapes. Things like Missouri primrose or purple poppy mallow both make excellent ground covers. There are shorter-lived reseeders like purple prairie clover, prairie coneflower, and brown-eyed Susan. Our prairies are home to an amazing variety of gay feathers or liatris, including rough gay feather and dotted gay feather. Dwarf blue indigo and the regular blue indigo are plants that you will keep in your landscape for decades. They live forever. And so does this plant on the right, the threadleaf Amsonia. Wild quinine is a plant I absolutely love for summer white blooms. The fall and late summer starts to show off the goldenrods, and along with them are the asters. And then there are natives for wet areas, including swamp milkweed, Joe Pye weed, golden alexanders, Culver's root, which is blooming its tail off right now, sneezeweed, which doesn't cause any sneezing and is a wonderful plant, white wild indigo. And then if you have a lot of shade, we actually have wonderful Midwest native shade tolerant plants like bloodroot, columbine, Solomon seal, woodland phlox, spotted geranium, Dutchman's breeches, and mayapple. And then I'll wrap up by saying it's not that we have to utilize only native plants. There are non-natives that make a lot of sense if they are not invasive species. So there's salvias, feather reedgrass, catmint, sedum, things like that, daylily, which make a lot of sense in our landscapes. So thank you for your time tonight. We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. I love that old Native American proverb. And to me, that sums it up by saying we are all temporary visitors here on the planet Earth, temporary stewards of wherever we are at. We don't live forever, and we can either leave the place better for the people that come after us, or we can make it worse. What are we going to do? I think we should practice conservation and make it better for the most of us. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Mallory, do we have time for questions, or what do you want to do?
Yeah, if there's any questions, those could be typed out now. For sure. Thank you so much. You're so well spoken. You're so wise. I love how you say everything.
I appreciate that very much. I enjoy doing these things. And again, if anybody wants more advice or information, just visit plantnebraska.org and you'll have a wealth of stuff right at your fingertips.
I'll also put that in the chat real quick.
And there are great people like that just doing amazing work across Nebraska. You might tune into a group called Prairie Plains Resource Institute out of Aurora. They are constantly working to restore prairie, mixed and tall grass prairie especially. Are there any planting events happening in Omaha soon? Probably not soon, just because we've hit July, and we usually shut down planting for our kind of work in July and August. I would avoid, for me personally, July and August is about the worst time to plant landscape plants or trees and shrubs. It can be done if you keep a hose handy and keep things wet, but it's so stressful when it's above 90 degrees for newly planted things. So I would wait for cooler weather, and that means check in with Plant Nebraska website, or you can send me an email, and we will keep you posted on planting events if you want to volunteer in some of the projects we're involved with in Omaha or elsewhere in the state. Are there places where we can find good instructions on building bioswales and retention ponds? Oh, yes. Kay Cotis, that is a great question. I should have put a couple links on there. I did have a link in my presentation, but I didn't click on it. And there really are great resources for that. Thank you, Kay, for doing that. One of the good ones is what I call the Blue Thumb Guide. That was developed in Minnesota, and they have a lot of that stuff now online. And then the Nebraska Extension has a lot of stuff also developed right here in Nebraska that is very much informative on doing a rain garden in your own backyard. There are so many resources out there now available. You'll be able to find that without any problem. And it will be good to focus on, I think, people looking up places from our part of the world. So Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Kansas would be a good place to start. I'll see if I can find that link. Where did I have it here?
I'm not sure about any copies or if it'll be available as an archive, but I did put in a YouTube link where it'll be available in a few weeks, I believe, or in the near future, that you can watch it at any time to see anything that you missed, or if you wanted to share it with anybody. Or just
Here's a link to a rain garden video from University Extension. And you can do one thing to think about with rain gardens. I should have pointed this out. A rain garden can be very simple. You can put it at the end of a downspout where you just excavate a little ground so it's lower than the surrounding landscape. Just make sure that when the water fills up that swale, it goes out away from your foundation. You don't want it ending up in your basement, but it can be a little thing like 20 square feet if you wanted. It could be up to 100 square feet or more. Sometimes they end up needing to have some drainage in the bottom, so they can be very complex. I would keep it simple. I really would. And just beware that a rain garden and a bioswale, too, for that matter, they are attracting plants that like it wet. And a lot of times these are our trees and shrubs like mulberries and tree of heaven and honey locust and elm. And you really do have to be ready to work at keeping out woody invaders or other plants you didn't want in there, because they're going to be wet and they're going to be places for plants to get started.
I saw in the Q&A, Fran had asked if there was go, uh, anyone to go to for like a home consult on ways to improve. Did you see that? I wasn't sure.
I didn't see that. A home consult. You
For
could call the Nebraska, Plant Nebraska. We would be glad to talk to you over the phone and put you in touch with people in the private sector who are doing more of that. But we can do neighborhood or public site consultations. And then Kay Cotis is on the line. She has her own business. So there are people out there that are approachable, and I wouldn't hesitate to contact a local garden center or people like that. Also, another great resource is University Extension and the Master Gardener Program.
Well, thank you. I'm so grateful for all these resources and everything. Um, Thank you so much for everyone who commented a question and everyone for attending and for supporting this local conservation effort. But most importantly, thank you, Justin Everstein, for this presentation, sharing your time and your talent and your knowledge. And I hope everyone has a lovely night if there's no other more questions.
It was a pleasure being here. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much.